All right, so let's just jump right in. For decades, it felt like the world order was pretty much set in stone. But now, well, it's like the tectonic plates of geopolitics are shifting right under Europe's feet, and it's forcing the entire continent to ask some really tough questions about its place in the world. We're going to dig into this whole new reality by looking at one country that's right at the heart of it all, Denmark. Just picture this for a second. You wake up, you grab your coffee, and you see this headline. We're talking about the year 2026 here, and something that was once unthinkable is now being said out loud. And get this isn't some showdown with a classic rival. No, this is a potential military standoff between two of the oldest, closest allies in the Western world. So you gotta ask yourself, how on earth did we get here? A military threat between two NATO allies? I mean, come on. This whole hypothetical crisis, it's not really about some remote island. That's just the flashpoint. It's really a symptom, a massive red flag that a much deeper earthquake is shaking the very foundations of the world order we've known for generations. Okay, so let's really break this scenario down. What it does is shine a spotlight on these cracks, these fractures in the relationship between the US and Europe that honestly have been getting wider and wider for years. And it's pushing European countries to face a future that, frankly, they never thought they'd have to prepare for. Now look, to be clear, this specific headline is hypothetical, right? And this is a big but, it's based on very real strategic thinking and some seriously growing tensions. You can think of it like a stress test for an alliance that's already feeling the pressure. And it all centers on this one piece of land that has almost overnight become one of the most strategically important places on the entire planet. So to really get the why behind a crisis like this, we've got to look north, way north. We're talking about the Arctic. For the longest time, it was just this frozen, forgotten edge of the world. Not anymore. It is rapidly turning into a central stage, a hotspot for global power competition. And don't just take my word for it. The US Department of Defense is being crystal clear about this. You got Russia, which is pouring military resources back into its Arctic territories. Then you have China, which has cleverly branded itself a near-Arctic state, and believe me, it has its own big plans for the region. But here's the real kicker. They're starting to work together more and more. All of this has completely changed the game, turning the region into what the Pentagon is now calling a new, more dynamic Arctic security environment. And this is the American response in a nutshell. The U.S. is not sitting on the sidelines here. It is making moves. The official strategy from the DoD talks about investing in the right stuff, the right infrastructure so that their military can, and this is a direct quote, rapidly project power across the Arctic. What does that mean in plain English? It means being able to get your forces where they need to be and fast to handle any threat that pops up. For the US, the stakes here are, and I'm not exaggerating, existential. A chaotic, uncontrolled Arctic could become what they call a strategic blind spot. Think about it. It's the shortest path over the pole for advanced missiles aimed at North America. That explains the urgency, that explains the intensity, and it definitely explains the tough stance we saw in our little 2026 scenario. And this is what brings us right back to Denmark. Because of its relationship with Greenland, this relatively small nation, we're talking just under 6 million people, suddenly finds itself plopped right in the geographic and political middle of this massive great power showdown. I love the framing on this. One analyst called this moment the end of Denmark's transatlantic vacation. Think about that phrase for a second. For decades, Denmark, and honestly a lot of Europe, could kind of just relax, knowing the US security umbrella was there. Well, that vacation is officially over. The alarm clock's gone off. Now, Denmark is being forced to wake up and become a serious player on the world stage, all on its own. And if you want proof that they're serious, just look at the numbers. Take a look at this. In 2024 alone, just 1 year, Denmark put up more than 2.8 billion euros in military aid for Ukraine. For a country of its size, that is a truly staggering amount of money. But that number, as big as it is, doesn't even tell the whole story. This next one really puts it all into perspective. That 2.8 billion euros, that's 2.2% of their entire national economy, their GDP. Let me give you some context for that. As a percentage, that's more than bigger players like Germany, France, or Italy have contributed. Denmark is without a doubt punching way, way above its weight class. And it's not just about money and weapons, not by a long shot. People are calling 2025 Denmark's diplomatic super year. I mean, check this out. At the same time, they're chairing the Arctic Council, they're leading the Nordic-Baltic group, they're holding the EU presidency, and they have a seat on the UN Security Council. This isn't an accident. This is a calculated, strategic play to step up and be a major voice on the world stage. So, okay, this all paints a pretty clear picture of a more assertive Europe, with Denmark as a prime example. But let's be real. All these big ambitions, building up your military, taking the lead diplomatically, that stuff isn't cheap. It comes with a massive price tag. And that brings us to a really fundamental question. Does Europe actually have the economic engine to power all this? I mean, it's one thing to write fancy strategy papers and make bold promises at summits, right? Talk is cheap. It is a whole other ballgame to actually have the powerful, resilient, and frankly, productive economy you need to back up those words. Not just for a year or two, but for the long haul. And if you just look at the big picture, things look pretty solid. Let's go back to our Danish example. We're talking about a AAA-rated economy. That's the best you can get. It grew almost 4% in 2024, thanks to booming sectors like pharma. And get this, Danish households have the highest average net worth in the entire group of developed countries. On the surface, it's a picture of rock-solid stability. But Europe's economic strength is way more complicated than just those big, shiny numbers. You have to look under the hood, and this is where things get really fascinating. Check out this incredibly clever study from Germany. So here's the deal. In Germany, you can't work on Sundays. So what happens when a public holiday lands on a Sunday? Well, for workers, the holiday basically vanishes. You don't get an extra day off. Economists realized they could use this quirk to measure the exact economic cost of a single day off. They just compared years with lost Sunday holidays to years with normal weekday holidays. Super smart, right? And the results? Honestly, they're kind of mind-blowing. They found that for every single holiday that disappears by falling on a Sunday, manufacturing revenue for that month goes up by 3.2%. Now, that might not sound like a ton, but it is a huge deal. It shows just how fine-tuned, how incredibly sensitive Europe's industrial machine really is. Every single workday matters. And that has massive implications when you're talking about something like, say, needing to crank up defense manufacturing in a hurry. So here's the main takeaway. Europe's ability to really step up and be a global power depends on these two sides of the same economic coin. On one side, you've got that top-line financial stability, the AAA ratings, the strong growth that lets you write the big checks. But on the other side, you have this super efficient, super sensitive industrial engine where every hour of production counts. And to be a real sustained geopolitical power, you can't just have one. You absolutely need both. And that brings everything full circle, right back to where we started. You have a potential security crisis brewing in the Arctic, you have this strategic awakening happening in countries like Denmark, and you have this economic engine that is both incredibly powerful and surprisingly fragile. When you put it all together, it's clear. Europe is standing at a major crossroads. This quote from the scholar Sten Rinning, I think, just puts it all in the starkest possible terms. The old playbook, it's been thrown out. That transatlantic vacation we talked about, it is definitively over. And now, Europe faces a really brutal choice. Either become a master of power politics or get devoured by it. So we'll leave you with this final thought. The old guarantees from across the Atlantic are now at best a question mark. Brand new threats are popping up everywhere from the high north to the eastern borders. The next chapter for Europe hasn't been written yet. And really, the only thing we know for sure is that Europeans are going to have to be the ones holding the pen.